Mr. Tunheim, can you explain the process once the investigation is complete? How do we determine if this was justifiable?
Yes, thank you. My name is Jon Tunheim. I'm the prosecuting attorney here in Thurston County, and I appreciate the question. I'm going to talk a little bit about the role of my office in the investigation, and then as the matter progresses forward. This morning, my office was advised about the incident and the fact that the critical incident team had been called out and deployed. I have a deputy prosecutor that is assigned to be a liaison to that team, who was consulted and advised briefly about what was going on with the incident. I will tell you right now that I won't be able to answer any questions regarding the facts of the incident because I have basically no more information, factual information at this point than you've heard so far. But we are we do make ourselves available through this liaison to answer questions for investigating officers if they have legal questions that come up during the process of the investigation or need to consult in some way or another with my office. Now, as the investigation progresses forward, eventually that will be submitted to our office for a review. And that is the role of the prosecuting attorney, is to review the investigative facts, make a determination as to whether any charges should be brought in the case, and if so, what charges should be brought, and to proceed forward if in fact charges are appropriate. To do that, we wait until the investigation is complete, so we really don't start our review until the investigation is completed, and then we've received all of the reports and the available evidence. And even then, we may ask for additional follow-up, additional work to be done if we have questions that seem to be unanswered from the reports. It is basically our review in terms of the officer's involvement of this to determine if the force used in this instance was reasonable. And that is partially a legal review and partially a factual review. And so in doing that, we look at not just the officer's statement we will also look at statements of all of the other witnesses that are interviewed along with the physical evidence, compare all of those things to make determinations about what our impression is as to what the facts are, and then look at the reasonableness of that given our role in presenting cases to juries around that question. I will tell you that in Washington, the standard for the prosecution of a law enforcement officer in using deadly force in the line of duty is fairly high. By law, an officer in this state cannot be prosecuted for use of deadly force if they acted in, quote, good faith and without malice, unquote. And so that is a legal standard that we will be looking at as we review all of the information once that comes to our office for review. So that is the process, and I'm happy to answer any questions about that.
Detectives and police officers routinely from those agencies.
We're often consulted in cases, yes.
And you prosecute cases that they bring to you. You need them in order to prosecute those cases. Isn't that correct? Doesn't that create a conflict of interest for the prosecutor? Would you consider a grand jury or asking the panel, a special grand jury, to review these kinds of shootings?
Washington grand juries aren't used to do legal review of these kinds of cases. There may be legal tools at use, but the reality is we look at cases like this every day, and the fact that it's an officer that's involved is not, I don't think, a conflict for us in the sense that we can evaluate a case. Well, the reality is we rarely have video evidence in most of the cases that we prosecute, and so you just evaluate what you get, and that's generally a combination of lots of different kinds of evidence, including eyewitness testimony, other physical evidence, and so sometimes video can be helpful, sometimes it cannot. It's not helpful, and it varies from case to case. So I wouldn't say that it's in any way an inhibitor for us to review the case, but I will say that we look at all of the evidence and compare it all together in terms of making our decision. The statute is written in a way that it talks about the use of force being reasonable and necessary with, in several different circumstances. One is to effect an arrest of somebody who has committed or is committing a felony. The statute goes on to say that an officer who acts cannot be charged criminally if they act in good faith and without malice. What we would look at, again, is what's the specific evidence that gives us that inference, that the officer was in fact in fear or not in fear? Because the reality is we're kind of looking at fear, the absence of fear, and or bad faith or malice, all kind of in the same question. If we were to determine, and I'm not going to go too far down the hypothetical road, but if we were to determine that in fact an officer's use of force may have been, not met a reasonableness standard, but that the evidence suggested that in fact the officer was acting in good faith and without malice, the statute would prohibit us from filing a criminal charge. That does not apply to other kinds of legal actions or administrative reviews by the department.
Since most officers say they're always in fear of their life when they go out, how is it possible that you could ever or not prosecute somebody?
You know, officers, an officer's statement is only one piece of the overall evidence that will be gathered. Now, you've heard the extent of the investigation that's going on and the amount of resources that are going into this investigation. I have every confidence that this is going to be an extremely thorough investigation, that there will be literally hundreds of details brought out to be looked at. The officer statement is really going to be only one piece of that. And as I said, when we look at the case, we're going to look at the whole of the case, the officer statement, but also the other evidence that's available and make a decision based on the totality of the evidence. I think there's a question over here.
We put our police officers in harm's way often, and we hold them to higher standards. In my case, I'm the father of black boys and black girls, and there are other people with equal concern. And my sense is that how can you make a decision, and I'm going to credit this to Channel 5, there is no indication to me that race was a factor in this case. Race can be a visible factor based on my mind and the inquisitiveness and sometimes the fear that I may hold for an African American because of my grade, my upbringing, or because of my background. How can you make that decision so fast as chief that race was not a factor? Is that just because nothing racial was uttered? That seems to be early to make that decision. You haven't talked to the officer. You have eons of questions that haven't been answered. You have a public out there that's, in my case, in a country that where 5,000 African Americans were lynched without a trial, and only 5 whites have been lynched in the United States, executed for killing blacks as we speak today. And we know in cases such as all American cities, all of this doesn't relate to the Olympia Police Department. I'm making a pretext statement here of what you're dealing with to drive some of the concern among us out there who are concerned about the discord and the history of discord. And we know that that's been very deep when it comes to serving the African American community. We know that law enforcement has been a bit on the short side of using all of the tools in their bags when it comes to African Americans. They go from A to Z.
It sounds to me like your question is for the chief. Are you directing your question to the chief?
My question is to the chief. How can we make this? My question is, and I have to say Channel 5 per this paper, I didn't hear the chief make this statement. There is no indication to me that race was a factor in this case at all. How can you make that decision so quickly?
Just so that we're clear around the context of the conversation, I was asked, I believe, related to whether race was an issue in this situation, and what I said was, I have no indication that that was. Whether that is or not, that will be determined by this investigation. But I have nothing that leads me to believe that it was a factor. Now, there may be something that could come up that may change that, but at the time I was asked during the press conference, there was nothing that I had or knew about that would be a determining factor for the actions of the officers at the time. That's the context of the conversation. So I want to thank you all for coming. Mr. Mayor, did you want to say any words?